Welcome to the Workology podcast, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, gain powerful insights, resources, and perspectives on the industries of human resources and recruiting. Join your host, Jessica Miller-Merrill, chief blogger of bloggingforjobs.com, for an in-depth and no-holds-barred look into the future of our most powerful business asset, the employee. And now, welcome your host, Jessica, with this podcast episode of Workology.
I'm a firm believer that we all want to do our best in life, in our role as parents, or in our jobs, or with our friends, whatever we want to be. The role of this is important, and we should surround our lives, especially when it comes to work, with good things. People want to be fulfilled. They want to be engaged. They want to be happy doing their jobs. Managers and organizational leaders are now faced with making work a place that does all these different things. Welcome to the Workology podcast. I'm here today talking with David Stewart. He's the author of Great Work, How to Make a Difference People Love. He's also the EVP at OC Tanner. David, welcome to the Workology podcast.
Thank you, Jessica. It's great to be with you today.
Let's go ahead and get started and talk about great work and particularly employee engagement and productivity. Everyone thinks that these two things are linked. I'd like to think maybe they are too, but why is that, and why are they so important now in our hiring, recruiting, and business efforts?
I think that's a great question. I see quite a few things going on. One is that linkage between employee engagement and productivity, or results, better outcomes, increased shareholder value. That linkage seems to be so broadly accepted now. I think there's enough research that's been conducted over the last number of years that points very clearly to when you do have higher engagement and you have employees who are willing to bring their extra discretionary effort to their work to do things that ultimately make differences, that improve results, it's incredibly valuable. And those organizations that have found ways to build strong employee engagement and a strong sense of accomplishing great things in an organization, we consistently see them outperforming their competitors in their same industries. So for sure they're linked, and I think it's becoming more important for a number of reasons. One is companies are expecting to grow, and if you're pushing hard on trying to grow, it means you're having to do some new things. You're having to accomplish things that maybe last year you were not accomplishing. And that takes extra energy, extra work. So I think the expectations around growth are affecting that trend. I think competition is affecting that. I think every company I talk to, as I travel around the world, I hear people talking about, we've got to find ways to differentiate. We've got to find ways to increase the value that we're delivering to our customers. And that needs to be done on a continuous basis. I was just recently over in India, meeting with a number of different CEOs and speaking at some conferences. And boy, I'll tell you, I was impressed in a culture where they're basically receiving a lot of outsourced work. Number one thing on their minds: how do we differentiate? How do we innovate? And I just see that message everywhere, which I think then leads to all organizations saying, how do we really get people that are fully engaged and productive?
I think that's the magic question for a lot of people. How do we get productive and fully engaged people? Do you think that technology plays an important role in that? And if yes or no, why or why not?
Yeah. I think definitely yes, it has an important role to play. It's interesting. Some people view technology as a little bit like a silver bullet sometimes, where they think, oh, if I can just implement the software, all of a sudden I'm going to have lots of engaged and sort of thrilled people. And that's usually pretty short-sighted. It takes a lot more than that. But I think technology plays a really important role in a few ways. Obviously, it can help create some efficiency and take some of the friction out of a number of different work processes. But for me, the biggest thing that technology does is help with communication. If you think about what drives engagement, so much of that is tied to communication, to appreciation. On the communication front, if you look at the proliferation of things like this that we're on today, podcasts where you can share really good insights, research, understanding with broad audiences that you simply couldn't get together without that technology. I think that's a wonderful use, not only outside an organization, but especially inside, along with social media. I think it just provides connection. It provides visibility for people, and it just seems to facilitate much more interaction and much more dialogue. And I think when that's happening, you get the sharing of ideas and you get the broadening of people's innovations starting to permeate an organization when you have technology as an assist in that process. That's, to me, its best influence.
One of the other things that I think technology really provides, and it goes beyond communication, but hopefully we're also recognizing our workforce, which there was a nice Forbes article that you were a part of, and it talked about a report from OC Tanner, and it says that the most important thing that a manager or a company can currently do right now is to recognize an employee, and that's 37% of employees are saying, please tell me I'm doing a good job or give me some feedback.
Exactly. And that's where so many people overlook that. They think, oh, I've got to do all of this stuff to motivate people, to get them to do stuff. And it is one of the most overlooked areas that if you just simply, and the research that you referenced, we went out to over 1,000 employees and basically said, what's the biggest thing your manager or your company could do that would influence you to produce more great work? And as you pointed out, 37% said something about just recognize me, just notice when I go above and beyond, when I apply that extra effort to bring about some improvement, some benefit, some new value to the organization. That's the biggest thing. A second and third to that were things like autonomy and other types of elements. Inspire me. It's so interesting when you think about we're all human, and what we crave is the ability and the opportunity to make a difference. And when that difference is made, to be able to share that. And so we're seeing just an enormous amount of value coming from social appreciation systems where you just make that so much easier to express appreciation when you see somebody who's done some extra effort or who's accomplished an extra result. Making that so much more fluid and accessible to everybody by leveraging technology has just been a massive benefit, I think, for companies all over the world.
I think sometimes it's really important to sit back, maybe go back to basics a little bit and just rethink. You don't necessarily need a crazy new perk program or maybe having to, completely rehaul maybe compensation or a flexible scheduling program. You could, those things are important, but you can go back to a basic sort of fundamental way to engage and get the most out of your workers with just simply saying, thank you. I appreciate the good work that you're doing.
Exactly. It's such a simple thing. And people think, oh, it doesn't make that big of a difference. It makes a huge difference, and it's easy to do. And it doesn't cost, bajillions of dollars to do it. And you're right, it's often overlooked.
One of the other things that I enjoyed as I was researching for our talk is you recently gave a TED Talk, actually last year, where you encouraged listeners and viewers of the TED Talk to talk to strangers. Can you walk us through what that is exactly and maybe why we should be talking to strangers?
Yeah, thank you. That was a fun experience. And that was, I was sharing some really interesting research that we had done as part of this book that we published called Great Work, How to Make a Difference People Love. And we were searching in that book for how do people in fact make a difference? What do they do? What are the specific observable actions that people are taking when they are innovating, when they are doing things that lead to fantastic outcomes that are way better than the norm and what's currently expected. And one of those key insights was people were talking to individuals who were not in their inner circle. You know, we all have an inner circle, close friends, usually 2 to 5 statistically, in your personal inner circle. And those are highly trusted individuals. Those are your go-to people, and they're a fabulous source of support. But what we found in the research was that most of the very best ideas, the best thinking, the new breakthrough ideas did not come from talking with people in your inner circle, because they think a lot like you. That's why you like them so much. They get you, you get them, right? That's why they're in your inner circle. But what we found was when you're not talking to them, you're talking to people far outside your own area of discipline or your own area of expertise or even your own area of life experiences. When you're having conversations with people who don't think at all like you about making a difference on something or a project or a problem you're wrestling with, it's amazing how those conversations start sparking new thinking, often in your own mind. And so the research, actually, our research showed this, and we've seen other research done by other research scientists who have also proven that the further away you go from your own area of expertise and close friends, the better the chances that you will have breakthrough thinking. And so that's what we were talking about, that often even talking all the way out to strangers, to people you don't know, but maybe you've targeted to have a conversation with them because of their background and how different it is from yours, those conversations just yield some fascinating new ideas. And then those become ideas you can integrate into your own efforts to drive new results.
Is there any place that you recommend as a best practice to go out and find these strangers to talk with? I mean, I like to have random conversations with people in the grocery store checkout line, but it isn't necessarily targeted. You're not, meeting somebody who's an expert, maybe in data scientists or in some other area that you are not.
Yeah. There's a few thoughts on that. One is sometimes just those more random conversations with somebody, in a grocery store line or next to you on an airplane or, in a train or a bus or just in any public setting where you get a chance to bump into somebody else. Often those conversations yield some very interesting things. So those are, a little more random, maybe a little more opportunistic. You can be more deliberate about what type of background might be interesting to have a dialogue with somebody, and being thoughtful about what's an industry that's not like mine that maybe wrestles with a similar kind of problem at a higher level. And then you can go, okay, gee, it'd be interesting to talk to a healthcare administrator. And if you've identified that, then it's not very hard, particularly, again, going back to our technology discussion a minute ago, you can identify people often in your own social network. You can go through your LinkedIn connections, and sometimes you'll have somebody that is an acquaintance that you have a connection with, but you've never really talked to them about a great work endeavor, a project, some initiative that you're working on. Maybe they're just a social friend, and just even reaching out to them, even though they're not a perfect stranger for you, you can have one of those kinds of dialogues. Or you may reach out to somebody in your network who knows somebody who you don't know that can help sort of mediate or connect you with that individual to have that kind of conversation. So it's become much, much easier. We talk about those, the 6 degrees of separation, and everything I've been reading is saying that number is coming down. It used to be 6 degrees, you could get to anybody in the world. And now, because of social media and technology, that number's getting a lot shorter. So sometimes a quote, perfect stranger is just the kind of person you need to talk to, but sometimes it's somebody within your broader circle of connections where you just haven't, had conversations with them about a particular work thing that you're wrestling with. And those tend to be incredibly productive as well.
Another thing that I would kind of add, I love the social media aspect and the tech that you're suggesting, is that don't ever assume that somebody doesn't want to be connected with you, or they're too good to build that relationship. I think that the best relationships that I've made are the ones where I reached out to somebody who maybe I didn't really know, or I didn't have a connection, but I just said, hey, I'm working on a research report, or I'm looking at doing some work in this area. You're the expert, or you're somebody who I've been really enjoying hearing about the work that you do. Can we connect via Skype or over the phone in the next couple weeks? You'd be surprised the people who respond back and engage.
I'm really glad you said that, because one of the things that I have encountered as I've met with thousands of people around the world and talked about this particular issue, one of the questions I ask is, what holds you back? Why don't you do this? What is it that causes you to not reach out? And it's very interesting, the kinds of responses I get. And most of them center around fear. They center around, even within an organization, which is where I think there's so much opportunity for these outer circle conversations, as we call them. If you've got somebody in even a medium-sized organization and they think, gee, I had to go talk to somebody in accounting. Let's say I work in HR, and I had to go over and talk to the CFO, or I had to go over and talk to somebody over in finance and kind of get their perspective, because it's so different than maybe the perspective I have in HR. And when I ask people, why don't you do that? Here are the things I hear the most. One is, man, I worry that if I went over there and talked to them, they'd say, well, I thought you were supposed to be an expert in that. Why did we hire you? Aren't you supposed to know that? And so there's this fear that almost like they'll be exposed for not knowing something that maybe other people think they should know. That's one of the things that I hear a lot. Or I hear, oh, they won't want to be bothered with helping me solve one of my problems. And in fact, it's a total myth that we carry around with us. And that myth is proven by exactly what you described. If you've ever had the experience where somebody's reached out to you, maybe they don't have much of a connection with you, and they've just said, hey, Jessica, I just thought I'd just pick your brain on something for a minute. I'm working on, thus and such project, and I just thought about maybe just getting your perspective. Have you bumped into anything like this? How do you feel? People feel honored. They feel flattered. It's like, wow, you sought me out for that opinion. And then they'll give their best thinking in that regard, because we all like to be part of helping solve problems or help make differences. And so it is a myth that we hold on to, that we can't reach out to somebody else for a variety of those types of reasons. And in fact, people welcome it, and they are happy to share their thoughts and ideas, way more so than we think. And I think we can move into that. Some of that, I think, has come from our school backgrounds, quite honestly. I was thinking to myself, what causes me to not do this as much? Now I love doing this, but for a while I sort of felt like, gosh, is it, you go through all these years in school where they have a word for collaboration. In our business settings, collaboration means everything. There's so much. We're trying to break down silos. We're trying to encourage sort of these peer-to-peer networks of conversation, and it's revered. Collaboration is revered. But you think about what we went through with 12 and 14 and 18 years of school. Their word for collaboration was cheating, right? And you get into an immense amount of trouble if you end up talking to somebody else, and you should be, quote, doing your own work. And so I think just collectively, as an entire society, we just have to get more fluent in having these kinds of conversations and having them become more natural, a natural part of how we work, and that we're not just huddled over our desk, sitting behind our computer thinking that's where I do my work and it has to come out of my head. And so I think it's a profound insight, and I see some companies doing a fabulous job where, as you've seen, they've started to change their work areas. they're changing some things to try to specifically ignite more of those conversations outside your little work area. I was just a quick example of that. I was over doing some research for our next book, and I was interviewing some folks over at Airbnb. I don't know if you've ever used their app. It's a fabulous company and a great service. But I was talking to them, and one of the things they do is in their common areas, which a lot of organizations have gone to, they don't just sort of let you go sit in the same place all the time. They will actually go tap you on the shoulder. If you've sat in the same spot for more than just a few days, they'll just say, hey, I think it would benefit you if you could go sit in other places. And they actually strongly encourage you to move around the organization even during your workday, so that you have more of those opportunities to have those outer circle conversations. And I thought that was inspiring to see.
We just did a podcast with Adidas, and they have a new interactive building on campus called The Pitch in Germany, and it is fully modular and customized, so designed to network and be creative and engage and build those relationships in a new environment instead of the traditional workplace. Pretty cool.
Cool. I'll have to look at them.
I'll send you the link to the podcast, and maybe if you want, connect you to their head of HR. She did a great podcast interview, or she's like strategic partnerships, but they're doing some really cool things over there.
Cool. I'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Well, let's take a little bit of a reset here. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill with the Workology podcast. Today we're talking about employee engagement and productivity, how to do great work and how to get great work out of our employees, peers, and colleagues. We're talking today with David Stewart. You can connect with David on Twitter, and it's at DAVID_STURT. I'll go ahead and put a link to his Twitter as well in the transcript of this podcast, along with a link to his book, which is called Great Work, How to Make a Difference People Love, and his TED Talk, which is also really great. So I encourage you to check it out. Let's talk a little bit about your book. It's a New York Times bestseller, Great Work, How to Make a Difference People Love. Let's talk a little bit more about that. What makes the book something that HR professionals or recruiting leaders should pick up and take a read?
It's been a fun project. As it describes, it's all about how to make a difference in the job you have right now, as an individual and as a leader within an organization. And it grew out of something quite interesting. The O.C. Tanner Institute, where I spend a good chunk of my time, basically studies work practices. And one of the things that was kind of unique that led to the beginning of this book was the company provides recognition programs and recognition award systems to organizations all over the world. And so we have this really interesting database of examples of literally millions of people who have been recognized and awarded for the work that they did, some outcome that was so significant that their organization said, you know what, we're going to give that person a President's Award or a Gold Award for what they accomplished. And in that nomination, when somebody goes in and says, I'm going to nominate Jessica for a President's Award, this is what she did. And then usually there's a fairly detailed, lengthy description about what people saw you do and then what outcome you created. And so that represents this massive big data set about millions of employees and what they're actually doing that lead to great work outcomes, or outcomes that are significantly greater than what was expected. And so I was thinking to myself one day, what could that data tell us? We've got all of these examples for every kind of job description all over the planet. What could that data tell us about the specific actionable behaviors, the things people do that lead to these great outcomes? And so we assembled a couple of different teams. We met up with 4 different PhDs from different universities and research firms, and we set about to study that. And what we discovered, what we did is we took a random sample of 10,000 examples of award-winning work, and we read through every one of those descriptions and then coded them for the types of activities, the types of observable behaviors we saw people do. And then once we had those all coded, we could then run all kinds of statistical analyses to determine which of the actual behaviors, what are those actions that tend to be most highly predictive of great work outcomes. And we found there were 5 particular things that seemed to drive significant increases in innovative outcomes. And so that's what we ended up writing about in the book, together with a couple of other insights around how people viewed their work differently, how they thought about their work. And it was interesting. One of those insights around how they thought about their work was they thought of themselves not through the lens of their job description. They didn't feel like they were owned by the box they occupy on that org chart. They thought of themselves a little more broadly than that. They thought of themselves as somebody who could make a difference in their job, not just execute on the 4 or 5 or 8 bullet points that are on their job description. And I found that pretty insightful, because you find people, even hospital janitors, who decide, no, I can do more than just sweep the floor or take the garbage out, and contribute in ways that will surprise you because they think of themselves differently. So we found these insights around how they think, and then we found these insights around the 5 specific actions that people take. One of those was the one we just talked about, which is talking to your outer circle, not just having conversations with the same people within your team or the same sort of go-to people. So that was one of those 5. Another one that we found that was really profound was people actually going and seeing for themselves, going and getting a different perspective. It's so interesting how we all sort of have this unwritten expectation that we work in our chairs, we work, at our desks or in our particular, work area. And what we saw as we interviewed all of these people around differences that they had made was that they went out, they went and tried to look through a completely different lens at their work. They went and watched how their work was actually being consumed. Who was the beneficiary of their work, and how did they interact with the output of your work? So many people don't do that. They just, this is my job, and I sort of finish my job, and then that makes its way to either somebody else downstream from me in the value chain or out to a customer. And actually spending time with customers of your work is incredibly insightful, and you get these perspectives that you just wouldn't get any other way. So going and actually seeing for yourself, sometimes I've seen also in lean practices a concept that the Japanese called gemba, which is a similar thing, go out and actually see. And so that's a powerful thing that people can do differently that affect their work outcomes. Another is asking the right question. We have questions in our work as a natural course of the work we're doing, but being more attentive to those questions and understanding, what can I do differently here? What is it that somebody would really love? And I had an interesting interview with the inventor of the cell phone, and I asked him, what happened? How did that come about? What was the earliest genesis of those ideas? Because that simply didn't exist at the time. And it was very interesting what he told me. He said, as I was given this assignment, I was given an assignment to actually not invent the cell phone. I was given a different assignment. And in course of thinking about that, it was actually a project to work on a radio-based car phone. And he instead of launching right in, he asked himself a really good question. This was back in the early 70s. He said to himself, why is it that when I want to call and talk to a person, I have to call a place? I've got to call a house, or I've got to call an office building in order to talk to a person. That doesn't make any sense. And if we're going to do that with a car, and now the car is going to have a phone number, that makes no sense. We got to figure out how to make a person-to-person call. And that question haunted him to the point that he went back to his CEO and said, we're working on the wrong project. and refocused the project entirely. And he ended up inventing and being the grandfather of the cell phone. And I just found so many examples like that where the questions people asked had a profound influence on their ability to make a significant difference. And it's something I think we can all do a lot better.
I've heard a similar story like that with around the digital camera. You know, the work that they were trying to do wasn't the guy's job, but innovation happened and the digital camera was born.
Exactly. And it's so fascinating talking to people, because so many people think, oh, I'm not an innovator, I'm not creative. Those are those guys, you know, these sort of brainiacs of the world, or these creative types. And man, I have such a different perspective now after having gone through all these interviews and all these examples of great work and innovation. They're mostly regular people in regular jobs like you and I, and they just look at it differently. They do things differently that lead to these kinds of really cool innovations. And I think that's something we can all do.
I am doing a series on the podcast coming up soon where we'll be talking directly to to CEOs to talk about what they want and how they prefer to be communicated with and engaged by their human resources and recruiting leaders within the organization. And I know that talent is a topic that CEOs are really interested in and along the lines of business innovation. How can HR and recruiting professionals be innovative in their roles within the organization? What sort of suggestions or best practices or nuggets of wisdom can you leave us with to be able to do that, whether it's in our own organizations or the industry as a whole?
Sure. I think in our own organizations, I think being clear about what it is you're trying to accomplish, what is it that we are trying to do? And I think if you start by thinking, what difference can I make here that people would love? It puts you in a very interesting frame of mind when you're thinking, what can I do that people will love here? It gets you out of just down in the weeds of, okay, I've got to implement this, or how do I change that? If you keep that broader desire in mind, I think it opens your mind to some new interesting possibilities. But to me, akin to that, and maybe a layer deeper than that, is what can you do to help people in your organization make a difference? How do you help them innovate? How do you help them do things that they feel proud about, that they feel like, wow, what I did today really mattered? That's to me what your best day at work is, that day when you're making a difference that other people will love. And so often we frame this entire thing in the context of, how do I get more productivity out of my people, or how do I get better business results? And sometimes by looking at that way, you miss opportunities that you don't see unless you are thinking about, how do we help them do what they really want to do? People want to make a difference. Help them. Give them some tools, give them some ways, give them permission, give them just a little bit of room, give them some inspiration about making a difference, because they want to do it. You don't have to beat it out of them. You can call them to it. And I think there's, again, like we talked about earlier, there's nothing like showcasing people's great work all across the organization. The more you talk about the successes, the types of things that people are doing right now in your organization to move things forward, to grow into the kind of culture you want, to accomplish the kind of goals and the kind of results you're wanting accomplished, when you shine the spotlight on the actions and the specific things people in your organization are doing, people are drawn to it and they're inspired to it. And to me, we got to do more of that as leaders in our organizations, because that's, to me, the heart of true leadership, is calling people to that greatness, calling them to what is possible that they haven't thought about if their heads are down and they're just thinking, I got to keep delivering the same stuff. And so engaging them in those actions, to me, has a beautiful effect too on engagement. because in our research, we found that as people are engaging in difference-making activities, their engagement goes through the roof. So it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing. You better trying to pump their engagement, or you better getting them involved in some difference-making activity, and then their engagement goes through the roof, and then it recycles and repeats. So those are some thoughts that I think might help HR leaders as they think about that.
I appreciate your insights here. And I would like to know, as we kind of wrap things up, where can people go to learn more about you?
Sure, a few different places. I write a weekly a column in Forbes.com. And so we welcome to look at some of those articles and insights that we're constantly writing. You can go to greatwork.com for more insights and some of the interviews and videos that we took as we conducted all of these interviews around difference makers and how they did what they did. Also octanner.com, where there's just an immense amount of research that's available right on the site that has all kinds of studies and best practices that we share.
Awesome. Well, thank you, David, for joining us today here on the Workology podcast. We certainly appreciate the time and your knowledge that you've shared. I want to thank everybody else for tuning in to the podcast here, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace HR and recruitment. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and until next time, you can visit Blogging for Jobs to listen to all our previous episodes and see additional resources. Thank you so much.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill provided by Total Picture Media.